right, we're doing all right on time, which is good with a bunch of attorneys. So thanks for sticking around for panel 3. We're going to close out with everything we've learned so far today into how to outreach to our communities. So this last panel is on community education and coalition building. We do have a scratch on the agenda. Unfortunately, Fanita Borges from Liberty Bank isn't with us today. But luckily, Marcus Smith is well-versed in the lending, the roles of financial institutions in creating affordable housing. So today we have, again, Professor Kristen Haseney from UConn Business School, Marcus Smith, who's the Director, Research, Marketing, and Outreach, Director of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, and we have another Marcus. We have Marcus Ordoñez, who is the Executive Director of the Hartford Land Bank. So we are going to start with Marcus Smith, who is going to talk about lending and also new tactics for bridging equitable access. So, and we're going to change the format a little bit and do a little bit more of an interactive Q&A here with Marcus.
Yeah, we'll keep it fresh, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So Marcus, homeownership is often seen as one of the most effective ways to build intergenerational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Yet that opportunity remains deeply uneven, as we've heard very passionately from Dwight Merriam in the previous panel. So for those in the audience who may not work day to day in the housing industry, why should they care about equitable access to homeownership? And what role can they play in closing the racial wealth gap?
Yeah, I want to echo what previous panelists have stated. Is I think homeownership is that pathway to closing the racial equity gap, the wealth gap. I think that, not to kind of rehash the data and really kind of drive the point home, but I think homeownership historically has been that mechanism within the United States of building wealth, and specifically intergenerational wealth that can be used to help pass down. Anybody who's bought a home and had their parents help, whether it's a down payment, closing costs, or whatnot, it's a unique opportunity that you might have, but there's thousands and millions of people out there that just don't have that opportunity. And so I think we talked a little bit about the racial wealth gap within Connecticut specifically, and really the root of that is the fact that we had the fifth highest racial home ownership gap in the country, right? So that's the percentage of white folks who own their own home versus the percentage of black folks. It's significant there. So, and that's really the driving force behind the inability to create that wealth. And I think just in Connecticut, white folks are more than about twice as likely to own their own home. So this is kind of, again, rooted in the historic discriminational policies, redlining, exclusionary zoning, and such. Okay, so that's kind of the problem, right? So why should we care? I think is right what you're getting at. The racial wealth gap isn't just an issue around housing; it's an issue around economic mobility, economic development, and more access to sustainable home ownership opportunities leads to stronger local economies. If you think about greater civic engagement, right? So people who own their own homes are more likely to serve on boards, to participate in public discourse, even just to kind of beautify their front yards, right? Just some very simple things like that leads to strengthening communities, and just general, again, greater intergenerational wealth opportunities as well.
Great. So we know that systemic barriers such as credit access, financial literacy, and wealth disparities continue to limit homeownership opportunities for Black and Hispanic households. So what are some of the biggest challenges you see in bridging these gaps, and what new tools or policies could help address them?
Yeah, I mean, there's really kind of three barriers. There's a lot of barriers, but the three that come to mind that we're kind of working towards solving for at CHFA is just the discrimination, like the discriminatory policies and the inability for folks to kind of pass wealth between generations, right? So if your parents didn't own a home, if your uncles, aunts, cousins, even any folks in your closer social network just didn't own a home, it's not only just that wealth piece, but it's also just, where do I start, right? So it's who's a good realtor? You know, how do I apply for a loan? What neighborhoods should I be looking at? You know, like they're just getting into the process. If you don't have that touchstone in your life, you don't know where to start generally, right? So it's what we can do, you know, kind of if that's a challenge, one solution to that is providing down payment assistance, right? So we have recently, about in 2022, Connecticut launched what's called the Time to Own program, which offers up to $25,000 of down payment assistance for eligible home buyers, first-time home buyers, and that down payment assistance is forgiven over a period of time. So if you're in your home for 10 years, that entire amount that you receive is let go, is forgiven. So that can kind of help with that lack of intergenerational wealth transfer. And what we've seen, which has been one of the great success stories of the Time to Own program, is that half of the people that have participated in the program are people of color, right? So black folks, we're talking about Hispanic or Latino home buyers, right? So this is a huge shift, right? So if you're talking if the overall home ownership rate is 80%, is significantly white, seeing people come through this program that it's like half the people that are participating and benefiting from the program are people of color, that's really kind of pushing us in the right direction. And I think just another thing that we do is helping with that counseling piece, right? So if you don't have that person in your life to help kind of get started, knowing that there are nonprofits out there, community-based organizations, housing counseling agencies who can offer that support, offer that assistance, is there, which is a great point. So that's one. So a second one is around credit and lending, right? This is me channeling my inner Finita in her absence, right? So BIPOC home buyers, BIPOC borrowers are more likely to be denied. This is, again, according to CFPB data, more likely to be denied. And if they do actually receive approval for a loan, the assistance itself is, the terms are not as favorable, right? So higher interest rates. So thankfully, FHA, Fannie, Freddie have started to accept or encourage lenders to accept what we call our alternative credit sources, right? So, okay, you maybe don't have a stellar credit score, but you've been paying your rent on time, you've been paying your cell phone bill on time. Historically, that wouldn't necessarily count towards your credit rating, but now it can, right? So that's one way. And another way, another barrier that CHFA has kind of started to take a look at is student loan debt, right? So any law students out here knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? We found that we took a look at our own home buyers who have come through the first-time home buyer program, and black borrowers had 20%, the unpaid student loan debt that they were carrying was 28% higher than white borrowers, right? So what we did to help remedy this, to consider kind of as almost an experiment, was what if we offered decreased interest rate financing, right? So what if we dropped the interest rate by 1 1/8, right? So it goes from 6 1/8 to 7 to 5. What if we lowered the interest rate for folks who are carrying that student loan debt? What would happen, right? And we found that, lo and behold, African Americans, black home buyers were coming through the program at a 30% increase, right? So the participation by black home buyers through what we call the Smart Rate program actually increased compared to our overall lending population, right? So the program ran for about 6 months, and no surprise, we ran out of money. But we're taking a look at the lessons learned from that program, as considering that student loan debt can be a significant barrier, and it is disproportionately a barrier for certain folks of color. What can we do as lending agencies to push back on that?
Oh, fantastic. So you mentioned the programs at CHFA. So your mission is to expand homeownerships to underserved communities. So can you share some of the other innovative approaches? You just mentioned one that your organization is using to make ownership more equitable.
Yeah, no, this is where I put the marketing hat on, right? I'm kind of like traditionally a housing nerd, but I'll put that aside for now. So a few years ago, in the midst of the pandemic, the federal government started a homeowner assistance fund program that helped with folks who are experiencing financial hardships, homeowners experiencing financial hardships, and helped them provided them grant funding to get them, to keep them on the right path so that they wouldn't lose their home. Kind of looking at the financial crisis from the early 2010s, what happened when people fell behind on their mortgages, a huge wave of foreclosures, right? So we didn't want to have that happen again because of COVID. So the federal government created this homeowner assistance fund. Long story short, Connecticut got a chunk of that funding, and CHFA was tasked with administering the program. And what we wanted to do was kind of push back on the legacy of these programs. Like, who is more likely to be left out and left behind by these assistance programs historically? It's people of color and low-income people. So we kind of made sure that our outreach and our marketing was specific. We called it out and said, this is what we're doing. We set out to advertise, to market in different languages, in different communities that historically we would maybe not have, right? So we decided, if we're in Waterbury, we're going to advertise in Albanian, right? Or for New London, we're going to advertise in Haitian Creole, because that's populations might be in those communities that don't speak English as a first language, and that's the way that we can possibly reach them. We're also partnering with organizations who can act as influencers, right? To kind of use like the social media terminology, right? So people who can show up who are trusted in the spaces, in these communities. So it's this is how we set up our outreach events at barbershops or at churches on Sundays following service, right? So it's reaching people where they are and helping them to get to where they want to go.
Okay, great. So you've mentioned a lot about marketing and outreach. Can you also speak to how the CHFA has shifted its approach in recent years in the role of supporting grassroots partnerships for encouraging potential homeowners of color?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of picks up along the same lines as I was just talking about. It's like, yes, we do the whole digital media thing. Yes, we're going to run digital banners on the websites, which drive everybody crazy and everybody's kind of blind to, right? Yes, we're going to run those little 10-second ads in front of YouTube clips that you're just kind of waiting for the skip button to pop up on the corner. But we're also going to spend a lot more time. I think historically, lending agencies like ours or government agencies like ours who kind of go out there to help will use, the outreach as a means to support kind of maybe traditional marketing, and we're kind of flipping that on its head, right? It's the outreach that we're prioritizing, and the marketing and the advertising kind of supports that function. It's showing up in different communities at different events, and trying to make the information as accessible as possible. Yeah. I think one last thing. I know I got the 5-minute hook. It was mentioned by Mr. Merriam. I've been in the business for 20 plus years, and I'm sad to say I've never met you before. I never heard from you before. The question did come up in terms of like there are no programs for what we call naturally occurring affordable housing in a lot of those communities. I would call attention to programs like what we have at CHFA as the Small Multifamily Loan Program, which Simsbury, I'm the next town over in Canton. We're just offered assistance for a 2-unit building on Center Street. So we're working we're in Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, but we're also working in smaller towns that have like this naturally occurring affordable housing that's in danger of going away. Or it's going to be affordable, but it's falling apart, right? So this is the type of program that's there to help support that, to support that housing. So that's kind of, I would encourage folks who are in this room, echoing everything that Pete said, that Mr. Merriam said, get engaged in your community, right? Be aware of the programs that are out there. Even if you're not a first-time home buyer, I know it's easy to get busy, but even if you're not a first-time home buyer, understand what programs are out there so that at least if your son, daughter, cousin, nephew, niece, if they come up to that point where they're about to buy a home, just knowing what's available or at least where to start would be really helpful. And just being an advocate generally in the community would be helpful too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Marcus, and thanks for those closing remarks.
Sure.
So at this point now, we're going to transition back to Professor Haseney, who's going to talk about some of the action items and takeaways that you all in the audience can take away from this conference and implement.
Hello again. Thank you so much for staying. So I'm going to talk about current tools and pathways for real estate professionals, as well as for those of you who are maybe not in the real estate industry, areas for improvement and best practices. So the question is, how can we garner support across constituencies for initiatives to improve access to housing and home ownership? And I'm here to say my message is, in my opinion, think big, but act in ways that are both big and small, and there's nothing that is too small. And I genuinely believe that. So, current tools and pathways. I'm going to start with the fact that we have fair housing. I'm going to bridge those topics again, fair housing as well as affordable housing. Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, I'll plug them. I believe in them strongly, and I believe in the process. They have housing complaints that you can file. I included a QR code if you want access to filing the complaints online. Please feel free to take a snap of that. But again, I think it's something that we need to remember, that there are processes in place. It may not be directly related to affordable housing per se, but as we've talked about throughout this panel, there is a connection between fair housing and affordable housing, and so I think it's important to remember that we have these resources and to share them. Contact your political representative. Again, if you're not familiar with how to do that, or if you have clients or customers or neighbors and friends and family and relatives who don't know how to do that, you can contact your state and federal representatives. Again, QR codes for finding out who your state and federal representatives are if you need assistance in locating those people. You can join an organization. I've heard it echoed a lot throughout this program and with all the different speakers. Get involved. Join the Connecticut Bar Association. Join other trade associations for your own industry, depending on what your profession is. Get involved in state and local community organizations. You want to make sure that your voice is heard. Volunteer at different community groups and events. Be a part of things. It's great to sit back and say that things are not going well and that you wish there was change, but it's helpful when you start to involve yourself in that. You can run for political office, volunteer to promote different issues, or work on different campaigns. Then we also have the maybe not so great, some people like it, some people don't, lobbying and PACs, political action committees. So this is a traditional route that a lot of businesses and trade organizations still go through to this day. Some people like lobbying in PACs. They have their benefits. There's a lot of negative criticism of lobbying in PACs, but it is another way that is effective. Many of the large state and national trade associations spend a lot of money on lobbying and political action committees. That includes the home builders, that includes the National Association of Realtors, it includes the appraisers. It's something that businesses are a part of. And as individuals or even small businesses, we can also participate in that. And participation can either be joining these organizations and voicing your opinion, or donating to these causes that support the cause that you're looking to support. But it's something that we can do as individuals and small businesses as well. And we got to keep in mind too that everybody else is doing it. So why would we not participate if the larger voices are participating? We can follow legislation and committees at the state capitol. So there are multiple ways to do so. We can track bills that you're interested in. You can follow on the YouTube channels. They put all the hearings out in the public domain so that everybody can view them. The CTN network has them available. You can watch. Every spring, I spend a lot of time watching different committees and hearings, especially because I can't be there in person. But it's good to know what people are saying and what the bills are that are getting a lot of traction or that are getting a lot of opposition or support. I think it's really helpful to stay abreast of all that. If you're interested in knowing how to do that, I have a couple slides here that outline this. So you can find the committees at the Connecticut General Assembly website. It's the drop down on their main page, and then from there you can select which of the committees you're interested in looking at the moment. For housing and real estate, it's not just in the housing and real estate, or insurance and real estate committee. Housing bills are also in other committees as well, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. You can look for them in any of the committees, but insurance and real estate, sometimes banking, sometimes general law, Planning and development, that's another one where there's a lot of housing bills. Planning and development in particular has a lot of affordable housing bills. So if you're interested in looking into those, select the committee that you're looking for from the drop-down menu, or if you have the bill number, you can plug in the bill number down at the bottom to track where it's at. Once you're at one of those committee pages, you can look in the bill record book. That will give you a list of all the current pending bills that the committee is considering. You can also submit public hearing testimony, which I've highlighted both of those for you so that you can see. If you do go to that committee bill record book page, like I said, it's a list, but that's where you're also going to find the bill number for the bill that you're looking for. You can read about the bills on their individual bill pages, and I'll show you that as well. But you also need the bill number if you want to just show up a week from now and say, okay, where is SB 177? And SB is Senate bill, whereas HB is House bill. When you go to that individual bills page, you'll see the bill number at the top. This one's SB 177, Senate Bill number 177 for session year 25. I also highlighted where you can actually click to read the proposed bill. If you see a general description that says, you know, to make housing more affordable in Connecticut, something really vague like that, we call that a placeholder, so that as legislation is being drafted and they're coming up with more specific language, you know that they're addressing this topic, but they don't have the specific language just yet that they're going to use to discuss in the committee and put forward if it passes out of committee. So areas for improvement. So education, I think, is a really important tool. We need to educate employees. If you are an employer, you need to make sure your employees are trained, that they understand fair housing, that they understand any other relevant housing laws. You yourself should be educating yourself and training yourself, or at least attending trainings. That includes professional CE. Look to your trade association, like we have the Connecticut Bar Association for lawyers. However, if what you're looking for isn't being offered, make sure that you talk to the bar association or your trade association and say, this is what I'm looking for, and then that way they know there's a demand for it and they can start to put together programs and continuing education that will be on the topics that are being asked about. When it comes to hiring other professionals, as closing attorneys, we work with other housing professionals. I think it's a good idea to make sure that other housing professionals are also educated and trained in the areas that they need to be trained in, including fair housing. So don't assume that they have this training. Ask them. Maybe even make it a standard practice that you require that people that you hire, other businesses that you hire, can show that they have in fact completed training in fair housing and other important areas. Speaking of trainings, if you're looking for those trainings yourself, we have the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities who does fair housing training on a regular basis. This is a screenshot of what their page looks like, where you can see what trainings are offered for 2025 and a QR code so that if you want to get to this page, you can get there yourself, so you can sign up for one of these trainings. We have an obligation to, I'll speak from the position of being an attorney as I'm licensed here in Connecticut myself. We have this obligation to also educate our clients. We may just see them at the closing table. We may not know who they are or meet them beforehand, and we may not see them afterwards. But when we have them there at the closing table in that moment, that's our golden opportunity to say, these are what your rights are. Tell me if something has gone wrong. Tell me what your experience has been. Let me help guide you through things. Don't just assume that everything is fine. Don't just assume that your clients know that, they can't be turned away from housing because of their race or because of their source of income. We have an obligation to affirmatively make sure that all of their rights are being taken care of, and not just the ones that we see for the 50 minutes or less that we have them at the closing table. I think it's part of our obligation, too, to know the protected classes. I'm sorry to say that I've had many, many conversations with people who say that their closing attorney didn't know that there were protected classes above and beyond the federal classes that we honor here in the state, that we recognize at a state level. As attorneys, it's clearly our obligation to be if we don't have these memorized, to have them available to reference. You don't have to remember these protected classes per se, as long as you have them handy and available and can utilize the list so that you can protect your client's interests and your own. I mean, really, it applies to all of us. There's nobody that it doesn't apply to. Thank you. Again, I pushed the fair housing complaint form if you want it, but I think it's important that our clients know as well that this is available to them. It's important too to underscore that this is the process, and even if you may not fully believe in the process, I think it's the process that we need to promote. I was teaching fair housing in my real estate law class a couple weeks ago. I have a class of 28 students, and I said to them, okay, stand up if you know somebody who has felt that they have been discriminated against. And 27 of my 28 students stood up. Then I said to them, okay, stay standing if that person who felt discriminated against filed a complaint regarding that discrimination. And every single student sat down. I had nobody who stood up, who stayed standing. We need to reinforce that this process is here to help people. I think it's a problem of maybe not having faith in the system, maybe not knowing that the complaint process is available, being concerned it's not going to have the desired outcome, but we need to reinforce that this process is here. Otherwise, what's the point? Why even bother having the process? Regarding your own business practices, make sure that you have policies in place that are neutral to everybody. However, I say that, of course, with those of you who practice in fair housing, that accommodations will be needed. The Connecticut Fair Housing Center has a beautiful tool that not a lot of people know about. Again, QR code if you want to get to this page. It's a reasonable accommodation request letter generator. Requests are not required to be given in writing, but they're helpful to make sure that people know what the request is that's being asked for. Please utilize this tool with your clients. You can assist them as someone assisting someone who is making an accommodation request. It doesn't just have to come from someone who is requesting for themselves. With regards to all these practices, even when you think your policy is neutral, there is still the possibility that it's having a discriminatory effect. And as we know, for those of us who practice in fair housing, even with the neutral policy on its face, having a discriminatory effect can still be considered discrimination. And of course, I know none of us here, we're all here for the same reason, and none of us want to be contributing to that. So it's important to do self-assessments and audits to make sure that your practices are in fact having neutral outcomes or the desired outcomes that you're looking for that don't benefit or negatively impact protected classes. Promote your commitment to fair lending, fair housing, equal opportunity. Make sure that you're vocal about it. Don't be shy. It's a good thing that we want to promote equity and inclusion. And so it's not something that we should be forgetting about or saying, well, I don't need to do that anymore. Clearly, if we're all here, there's still work to be done. Last couple points. I think it's important that we talk, everybody together. There is so much that people experience that they just assume is what everybody else is experiencing. I have, again, I'll actually reference the same Newsday documentary that Professor Humber did in her presentation earlier this morning, where the testers that go out and test to see if treatment is equal amongst different races, testing time and time again reveals that it's not. If you're interested in taking a look at the documentary, please do so. But we need to talk to each other. Part of what the issue is that we're silent around these areas. We don't talk about it. I don't say to my neighbor, perhaps, this is what I experienced when I went into this office. They asked me for proof of funds. Did they ask you for proof of funds? Things along those lines. What did they ask you for X, Y, or Z? We need to talk to each other, and we need to have our clients talking to each other. And then lastly, we need to listen just as much as we need to talk. We need to listen to what the other side has to say. We need to listen to what other people are trying to share with us. We can't make assumptions, and we need to, work together to achieve our common goals. So there have been times when, you thought it was going to be just about promoting your own message, but you have to remember too that it's equally as important, if not more important, to listen to what other people say so that you can find that common ground that maybe you didn't know was there. So. And I'll just close on a couple of great quotes I thought from Michael Corris, who's the new executive director of the Connecticut Municipal Redevelopment Authority, that it's about bringing people together, right, and to have honest dialogue. And I love, too, the idea, because I fully believe in it, that we should use incentives rather than disincentives or sticks to encourage people to do the right thing. And I love that he reinforces that. This is from a Hartford Business Journal from January. But I'm optimistic about moving forward, and I think we have the tools to do so. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the program.
Marcus?
Hello, everyone. Oops. Okay. Hello, everyone. Oh. No, you're good. Okay. All right. There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Marcus Ordoñez. I'm the executive director of the Hartford Land Bank. I'm going to speak to you with the land bank lens on some communication and outreach strategies that we do and hopefully can translate into the work that you're doing either professionally or personally. And so what is the Hartford Land Bank? The Hartford Land Bank is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to acquire tax delinquent, abandoned, vacant, blighted properties in the city of Hartford and steward the rehabilitation process to get them back on the tax roll and being contributing assets to the neighborhoods. And so what does that mean? How do we do that? And so land banks were created in municipalities, in counties and regions with large number of vacant properties, too large for the municipality to do anything with or have funding for. And so land banks were created to help lighten that burden. And so one of the special powers that a land bank has is that when we acquire a property from the city, we're able to clean away the liens, blight liens and liens on those properties to help lighten the burden of the construction costs that will definitely be needed because these are most likely severely dilapidated properties. And so the way that Hartford Land Bank currently predominantly gets properties is directly from the city of Hartford. We are also able, if funding is in place, to acquire properties through private sale or donation. But right now, we acquire blighted properties from the city of Hartford, and then once we have those properties, we put out a request for developers, and we do our best to try to match who we think is the best match for that project. And so we look at their financials and experience and overall intention for the property. And so the property types that we currently work with are predominantly residential from 1 to 6 unit buildings. And so we will match the property to the developer and sell the blighted property to them, but we will stay in the conversation with them, in the process with them, to help steward the process along and support them if they come into any roadblocks along the way until the property is fully renovated. And so when we, and as I mentioned, when we acquire properties from the city, we'll make sure that they are secured properly. We'll board up windows or change out doors if needed, and we'll also plug up any holes that might be damaging the property further until we can find the developer to take it over. And so when we're looking in the process of matching the developer, we are looking to promote BIPOC Hartford-based developers first. That is our priority, and so should that, we can't find anyone for that, then we'll slowly work out from there, but BIPOC Hartford-based developers is our priority. And again, if the developer is looking to keep the property as a rental unit, they're able to do so, but we are hoping to encourage more homeownership, because that's a side goal of ours in the work that we're doing, is to promote and create more homeownership opportunities. And so in order to incentivize developers to do that, Hartford Land Bank will help fill the construction gap that occurs in a lot of these projects. And so a lender is not going to lend past the value of the property, but the total cost for construction can be significantly more than that. And so a developer will have to come out of pocket or get a second loan from someplace. And so to incentivize developers for homeownership opportunities, we will fill that gap. If the developer agrees to sell the property to a homeowner occupant who's going to live there for a minimum of 5 years. The longer that pre-COVID, there wasn't a lot of interest in vacant lots. We acquire structures and vacant lots from the city. But post-COVID, because construction costs have continued to rise, we are noticing there's an increased interest in new construction because developers are realizing if I spend just a little bit more, I can actually start brand new, top to bottom. So we are seeing a good mix of people being interested in rehabbing blighted properties, but also creating new housing on vacant lots. Just some best practices regarding transparency and open communication that the Land Bank does that we have found to be very useful is we have public meetings and we also have public comments during our board meetings monthly. So we've received direct feedback from community members on questions they had about the Land Bank, the type of work that we're doing, suggestions or concerns they may have. And then we also make sure that our minutes from those meetings are also available to the public. We recently became a land bank authority for the city of Hartford, and essentially it's making us quasi-public, which we would have the public meetings anyway, but we were already doing that because we're trying to strive for full transparency in the work that we're doing. We want to make sure that community members are feeling heard and respected when someone from outside the neighborhood is coming in looking to make change in the neighborhood. And so we also want to make sure that we get input from the community. And so a big part of the work that we do is getting community buy-in and community support in what we're doing. You know, anytime that we acquire a property from the city of Hartford, that means that we have to get reviewed, the list of property has to get reviewed by planning and zoning and then approved by city council, which also requires a public hearing so people can share their thoughts. And if everyone wasn't on board, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing. And so I'll touch on us reaching out to the local community in a minute. And so also to foster transparency and maintain engagement, you know, we make sure that we are on social media. We have monthly newsletters in case those who aren't able to attend our meetings can still find out what the Land Bank is doing. Our meetings are virtual. Again, we're trying to reach as many people as possible. And so one way that we try to directly engage with the community is in Hartford. Hartford has NRZs, which are neighborhood revitalization zones. And if your town doesn't have an NRZ, the closest association might be a neighborhood association. And so we will attend monthly meetings for the NRZs. Again, I'm going to be reintroducing everyone to the Land Bank. I've been the executive director of the Land Bank for a year now. And so essentially reintroducing the Land Bank, making sure that it's clear on the type of work that we're doing and how we do it, because we don't want folks to feel like someone's just coming in and taking over their neighborhood. We're here to help rectify the issue of blight happening in the neighborhoods. And so a way to get community input as well is that we are asking the NRZs to supply us with their top 3 or so properties that they're concerned about in the neighborhood. And so if the Land Bank is able to acquire those properties to help steward that construction and rehabilitation faster than what's been happening, then great. And if we're not able, if the city does not own that property, then we can at least make sure that the city's aware that this is a problem that the neighborhood is concerned about. And so we also try to collaborate whenever possible, just like today. UConn has been a great collaborator. We've done partnerships with the School of Landscaping, School of Medicine, as well as partnering with local high schools like CREC, introducing younger students to the type of work that we're doing to show that there is a way to have a positive impact on what's happening in your neighborhood. And also in regards to education and sharing knowledge, as some of the other panelists were talking about, is also a huge part of what we're trying to do. And so the Land Bank noticed that there are hundreds of blighted properties in the city, but the pool of developers who are local is quite small. And so to help improve that, the Hartford Land Bank created a cohort developers training program. Essentially, we were helping to train folks who are local to Hartford who are interested in becoming developers, or folks who are already doing the work but wanting to take their work to the next level. So if they've done a condo rehab, or maybe they've renovated their own property but now looking to do a 2-family or a 3-family, we had a program that would take them through the whole process of doing a rehabilitation in the city of Hartford, meeting with licensing and inspection, and walking them through how to put their numbers together. And through that process, we've had 2 cohorts now, and as I mentioned earlier about the new construction and vacant lots, there's also a skill gap that we're noticing. So even the folks who have experience doing rehabs may not necessarily have experience doing new construction. And so what we're doing is we're trying to foster joint ventures between the more experienced developers and the less experienced developers, so that they can work together on one project, and then they go off and can now double their efforts and share that knowledge and pass it along. And so, yeah, I would say in the work that you're doing, whether direct or indirect, if you can be that middle person to bring 2 different groups together who can make a change. You know, a lot of the times we're sitting in meetings or commissions or just general talks, because a lot of us geek out on things like that. You know, it's great to be able to help foster those connections. And I don't have to say too much on this, but also the value in opposing viewpoints, right? This is law professionals here, so I think everyone's well versed in being able to hear both arguments. But in our experience, it's you know, we've received pushback on the work that we're doing, but also great support. And so when those 2 opposing opinions come together, has really fostered some really interesting conversations on how we can improve. We were talking earlier about affordability, and so one of the issues that we're looking to address is when we do that gap financing, a lot of the time the properties are sold at market rate, and what we want to do is to be able to cap the sales price of those properties so that the folks in the neighborhood can afford, or more easily afford, the properties that are getting rehabilitated. Unfortunately, our funding is limited, and so because we're supplying that gap funding, we can't afford to put in the extra amount in order to cap the sales price. But if you do come across different bills that support gap financing, and I know Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is one of those that's looking to get passed at both the federal and state level, would take over that burden of gap financing off of us. And then we would be able to use our funds that we fundraise for to cap the prices of some of these homes. And so we're really looking in different ways and green light thinking on how we can stack some of these funding sources. And so I'll just close out with, you know, what can you do? Everyone here has very different experiences. Everyone's going to do a little something different with work. And so I think it's important for everyone to be a part of the community development ecosystem. And so whether that's from you joining a local organization in your neighborhood, or getting involved and being a board member on a nonprofit that you're interested in, or even an advisory board, having someone on a board with legal experience or just that perspective can make a huge difference. I know that we look for that type of input on my own board, and also if it's possible to do some pro bono work. A lot of smaller organizations or nonprofits, you know, they're not set up and could use some help creating their bylaws or even having contracts reviewed to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of from an outside vendor or someone coming from out of state looking to partner with someone. And so, yeah, and also, like I said, supporting local bills. And so there's definitely a lot of different ways to get involved. And if the land bank can help foster any of that in any way, please let us know. And I'll just finish with just showing some before and afters of the work, because it's just kind of dramatic with the work that our developers do, right? So, thank you very much.
Thank you all for sharing your perspective and expertise with us. And I know that this now portion separates you all from lunch or getting something to eat. But hopefully there are some few questions we can address before we wrap up. I see a hand in the back.
Good afternoon. My question is for Marcus from the Hartford Land Bank. What can the citizens from Connecticut do to help the land bank to get the properties and not sell the properties to out-of-state people that will become landlords, and especially scum landlords that will increase the rent for the Connecticut citizen?
Thank you. One way you can support the land bank is, you know, when the city is looking to transfer properties to us, you know, we're always looking for support in the mission that we're doing. And, you know, the more properties that we, you know, hope to come through the land bank, we're hoping to expand the cohort program so that we can help support local developers further. And so also when we're pursuing funding at the state level and there are open hearings, we're always looking for folks to come and have a positive voice to help us.
I would add to that too. I mean, Hartford Land Bank's social media game's pretty tight, so if you, I would check them out. Just in terms of like telling stories, I think the way that you guys, between video and visual, just like I think it's really moving to show the changes not only in the properties but the people that are coming through and impacting the neighborhood. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. And I encourage anyone who has any questions about the land bank or has heard something about the land bank and you're not sure if it's true or not, please reach out to us. And so we're happy to have conversations with anyone. So send us a message on social media, come to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and we're happy to have a conversation.
Thank you. I just want to do a little push for a fair housing issue that is little understood, and I hope that all of us in our practices can start paying attention to. Survivors of domestic violence are covered by gender and discrimination. It's protected federally and locally, but we're not really looking at the deeper issues that the abuser is deliberately destroying credit scores, and lenders often use their marital status against them. In the rental industry, the federal government has public policy to protect survivors. They will intervene in a private contract and take the abuser off of the lease and change the terms of the lease. But the same thing isn't available for survivors in homes. We are getting a lot of pushback from lenders who will not indemnify, will not allow indemnify because they're afraid the abuser will sue them for taking them off the loan. They're not being allowed to modify. The receiverships they receive in their divorce decrees are not being respected, and ultimately they're blaming the agencies, the federal agencies, for doing this, but we haven't seen proof of this. So I would encourage everyone, since it's really hard to get legislation done, to just sue on this discrimination point, because it's really preventing a lot of survivors from keeping the most affordable home they have access to.
I think that's a great note to end today's symposium. I want to thank these three panelists, all the other panelists, and all of you for your attention, and say have a great weekend.